If you're over 40 and the fat loss has stalled, someone has probably said, man, maybe it's your hormones. Take a testosterone booster, get on TRT or HRT, and now get a GLP-1 and watch the weight just fall right off. My guest today has been on testosterone therapy for over 25 years. He wrote what many consider the definitive book on it. And he'll be the first to tell you that most of what's being sold to you in that area is a scam. We discussed today when hormones do and don't matter for you after 40, when they might be distracting you from the real problem, and the one thing you need to be doing right now to optimize your hormones, whether naturally or alongside HRT, if your goal is to lose fat and build muscle. Welcome to Wits and Weights, the show that puts a popular piece of fitness advice under the microscope, finds the hidden reason it doesn't work, and gives you the deceptively simple fix that does. I'm your host, Philip Pape, and today we are examining a belief that is everywhere right now, that if you're older, if you're over 40, if you can't lose fat or build muscle, your hormones are, of course, the problem, and fixing them is the solution. Testosterone clinics, creams, pellets, peptides, GLP-1s, all the stuff we're talking about today, all over social media. And the premise is that a syringe or a supplement will solve all your problems when nothing else seems to work. My guest today is D.J. Campbell. He's been on testosterone therapy himself for more than 25 years. He's the author of the Testosterone Optimization Therapy Bible, and he co-founded BioLongevity Labs. He is right in the thick of this industry. He knows better than anyone where the real value is based on the evidence versus where the marketing maybe is overhyping or cherry-picking the science. By the end of this episode, you'll know the latest on testosterone, where hormone therapy and peptides fit into, of course, your lifestyle and your health, and the most appropriate use of GLP-1s, while avoiding some of the downsides around muscle mass, aggressive deficits, and even performance. Jay, welcome to the show.
Philip, thank you so much for having me, man. That was an awesome, it was a little different than a normal bio, but I'll receive that and blessed to be speaking with you today. So I know this is going to be an epic interview.
Absolutely. And a lot of the listeners probably know who you are, and we'll get into like your background and where you're able to speak from credibility to some of these topics.
Sure.
And that'll just come up. So I really want to start with kind of the big question where people who listen to this show, for example, they know the value of lifting weights. They know the value of life, getting your sleep, taking care of your body, eating right. But how likely is it that hormones on the list of things that are important are the reason that somebody is struggling to hit their goals, whether it's fat loss, building muscle, or performance?
So it's a great question and a complex answer, because I really think it also depends on like where the person is in the world. DNA does play a role, but in the modernized, areas of the world right now, which would obviously be the West, clearly almost every coastal population center, urbanized city in the United States, the environmental contamination is unavoidable. Like I say, from the water that we drink in plastic bottles. I mean, this is the best water on earth, right? This is Icelandic water. This is the best water you can get like in a bottle in the world, because it comes from an actual deep mineral springs still in Iceland. It's one of the only places in the world that's not contaminated. But between the water, the air, the food, the blue light, the EMF, I mean, it's very, very difficult for people today. And really in their younger, like now, even in their late 20s, early 30s, mid 30s and beyond, to not have, some sort of hormonal dysregulation. And, I think the medical system, if we want to call it that, the allopathic, sick care, illness management system is not trained to help people understand hormonal deficiencies. They're not even like looking for that, right? Like most of the doctors, even a young guy or let's say an aging person, say 40 or older goes, and they're complaining of, brain fog, dysregulated mood, lack of energy, belly fat, et cetera. They literally want to give them, a PD-5 inhibitor like Viagra or Cialis, or they want to give them a SSRI, right, to alleviate their brain fog and their poor mood. And they'll never even look for the underlying condition, which is obviously usually sometimes a hormone, not usually, almost all the time now at this point, some form of hormone deficiency. So I want to say that I would say between 70 and 80% of people who are doing everything else right, if they have a hormone deficiency, it's going to be a huge obstacle for them to get to where they ultimately desire to go, which would obviously be leaner, more toned, more muscular.
Yeah, so that's interesting. What about the flip side of that? People that aren't doing all the things right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? How likely is it that hormones are the causal factor. You know what I mean?
99.9%. Because the issue is there. So if you're fat, and I mean fat, right? And the BMI is, not the greatest gauge for muscular people, obviously. But if you're, 29 or 30 or higher BMI as a middle-aged man or woman, the likelihood that you have a hormone deficiency is very high, right? Because the insulin resistance, the belly fat, the inflammation, the cytokines, all the stuff that's going on in that belly fat or that fat that's over your internal organs is literally causing a hormonal dysregulation. So it's crazy. It's, the chicken or the egg scenario, right?
Yeah. I'm glad you did. I'm glad you said that though. Because like that, people expect the other answer. And like you said, it goes both ways, right? It influences your hormones. It's like you got cytokines. Well, build muscle. Now you have myokines kind of offsetting and things like that. So I want to unpack a couple of things you mentioned about the hormones in the environment. You mentioned environmental contamination, and that's an interesting area, right? Because unless you're very careful with how it's framed and like the evidence, you could go, there's a lot of quackery in that world, But I've heard you talk about this, and like I think about women's health, for example, and all the cases of infertility and endometriosis and all this stuff that's all of a sudden blowing up, and then low testosterone in men, and and some of that is testing and things. I get it, and what's the other thing? Older folks that go to the doctor, not even younger guys. I mean, I know plenty of older folks in my own family, older guys in their 60s and 70s, they need to get their testosterone checked, and the doctor never mentions it. It's like, what the hell? So that's important.
They don't understand how to treat it anyway, right? And again, most men who do go in their 30s or 40s, and only because it's at the behest of their wife because they can't get an erection or they can't hold an erection or they just have no desire, right? Like a lot of women think their husband's cheating on them because they have no interest in them, but it's really because they just have a dysregulation of their hormones. But in truth, if you go to a doctor and the doctor's not qualified, which is again 80 to 90% of GPs, right? Actually, insurance doctors, they're literally going to, if you ask them to do it, they're going to test your total and not your free. And then they're going to be like, oh, you're 350 or you're 400 or you're 290, you're fine.
Yeah, you're in range, right?
They literally don't understand the difference between free and total anyway, because they never learned that stuff. So they're never going to tell you, oh, you have a testosterone deficiency, because now the onus is on them on treating you and they don't know how to do it.
And now let me, here's another thing, right? So if you had to pick like a pie of all the things that have affected testosterone in the modern generation, right? You mentioned environmental. There's also a general decline in testosterone. Although I've heard more analysis of this, that maybe that's a statistical thing and not a real thing. Or in other words, the population has lower testosterone, but it's correlated with higher body fat. And so you would expect it, right? Is that what it is?
That's literally what they say. And if you look at this, what they call the standard mean deviation of like the levels, the ranges at the top and the bottom, that is definitely happening. It's flattening. And people are getting fatter. So you can 100% say that, but there are studies out there, and I've published them, in my book. The landmark one was the Hebrew, and they took, 68 or 70,000, I think it was 68,000 guys on all 7 continents. And they studied them from like 1972. It was a meta-analysis, and then it was released. I think the data was released in 2014, but it was a 40-year thing. And they were able to show that testosterone levels were down about 80%, and fertility levels were down statistically, like you couldn't even account for it. So obviously they deduced that it's just the environmental contamination. And again, when I say environmental contamination, I mean, it's just modernization, right? Like this is the results of everything that we are building, all the plastics, the phthalates, the pesticides, the things that are almost unavoidable, and that's why, like, when I talk about this stuff, like I always say, the biggest tool in the tool belt for everyone, man and woman, is always going to be therapeutic testosterone. However, you definitely have to change your lifestyle first, right? Like we have to make sure that we account for all the things that are affecting us. I mean, dude, think about all the men that are wearing nylon boxers, lowering their sperm count, suppressing their, the spacing in their testicles with these, horrible, again, polyester, whatever they are, nylon, threads that, essentially suppress hormone production. So there's so many different things that we have to account for. And so it's really, really difficult, if you interview smart doctors that are really, I would say awesome in prescribing hormones these days. And thankfully, there are enough of them out there. They will tell you that it's very difficult to be, especially in like a New York City or LA or Miami, to do everything naturally right and still not have an issue. Right. So that's, to me, can be the biggest thing. And that's why I always say at the end of the day, if you're doing all the things right and you still have a dysregulation, it's best to look into therapeutic hormones because, again, it will move the needle bigger and faster than anything else will.
Yeah, for sure. So I definitely want to hit on these pieces then. So when we talk about therapy, and I also am a big fan of therapeutic options, as you mentioned. Sure. I want to get out of the way, like the non-therapeutic things that a lot of people go to because it's cheap, easy, quick. I just want to try it out. And I'm thinking there's both like testosterone boosters, like it says it on the package, and also herbal stuff, ashwagandha, all that stuff that some of it's great for other reasons potentially, but talk to us about that.
Well, yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up because this is so old for me, right? So, in my first book that I wrote, which was really written in 2014, but published in 2015, was the first one. It was the definitive TRT manual. And as you know, a lot of people have come to me and said this. I was the one that never said this, but they're like, that Jeff Bezos read that book because it was, number one in Men's Health in 2016 for like 6 months. And then in 2017, he went from pipsqueak to the guy walking around with his shirt off. He's like, he read that book, James. So many people have said that to me. But look, we analyzed in that book a whole chapter on natural testosterone boosters. And then we also obviously went deeper into the 2018 book, which was obviously the one you quoted, the TOT Bible. And the reality is that all the statistics and meta-analysis on boosters, call them, aphrodisiacs. You mentioned ashwagandha, there's tribulus, there's the stuff that Huberman sells. There's all these different things that like when you take them.
Fenugreek, exactly.
Yeah, but you take them and then you measure, you will see an elevation in a lot of different things. The thing is, it's always transient. And so I always tell people like none of these things are going to keep you optimized or get you on the path to being optimized. And that's the thing. And, I always make the joke about it now is what is it? It's Nugenics, right? Or it's Frank Thomas and Doug Flutie on those commercials, right? And they're showing them with their shirts off in their 50s and 60s. And it's like, oh, if I take this booster, I'm all jacked. And it's so many people still believe that, and, whether it's due to needle phobia, or the fear of, there's so much demonization, as you know, in the public about taking therapeutic testosterone and how you could become addicted, or there's the Lyle Alzado nonsense. I mean, there's just so much stuff attached.
GLP-1s are no problem with very little research, but no.
So but it's a stigma, right? It's been there for decades, and there's still so many people that are attached to the stigma, and because of that, and let's not forget also the lack of education in the physician community or lack of enough doctors, again, for insurance providing doctors that can prescribe testosterone. And you have what you have, which is, again, people being fleeced, and that's the truth about all of these things. And again, like you said, ashwagandha, great for cortisol suppression. I take it at night before I go to bed. Is it going to increase my testosterone to make me feel optimized? Absolutely not. And there are tons of other things that we already mentioned, and again, these are all covered in my book. But at this point today, outside of like taking HMG or HCG and clomiphene or even clomiphene itself, which will increase FSH and LH, which is obviously follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, there's nothing that is going to actually optimize your hormones other than the real McCoy. It's just, there's nothing out there.
Yeah. So let's play the stack game, the lifestyle stack and then the therapeutic stack on that, because man, I've worked with clients who they lose all this body fat as they're on TRT, and then they're all of a sudden too high on because that has gone up naturally as well. So how much of low T symptoms, I guess, and actual low T can be influenced by, for example, I think fat loss is the big one, but there's also under or overtraining, poor sleep, stress, all the other things in life. Where would you put the biggest levers?
So for sure, if you're going to do this naturally, and again, this is the chicken and egg syndrome, right? Because an obese man struggles with energy, right? So if you're going to give them a protocol, maybe you throw in a microdose of retatrutide or tirzepatide, and you give them therapeutic testosterone. And obviously you have your training dialed in and their cardio dialed in and their eating dialed in and all those things. It's better, for an obese man to be on, again, a combination of those things, essentially, if they're doing all the other things, than it would be to just attempt to have the obese man do all the things without testosterone and Reta or TERS, because again, their metabolism is so slow because they have the obesity and, the insulin resistance, et cetera. So I like when they are, heavier and dealing with these issues. Working with them.
Can I challenge that a little bit? Just a tiny bit. I want to see what you think about this. You said because the metabolism is so slow. I mean, there are a lot of overweight men who have a rather high expenditure. But I think isn't the issue more the appetite and the hunger and just the inability to change that lifestyle to do what they need to do?
I think it's multifactorial.
Okay.
I think we have to deal with the reason they're like that is because clearly they're not eating well.
Right. And
if they're eating boxed foodstuffs and engineered food all the time, then without a doubt, what you just said is true. They have some sort of an addiction to eating like shit. Like Sal says on Mind Pump, it's discussed with me, the hyperpalatability of food from all the chemicals. A lot of these people are addicted to the chemical sensation.
Yeah.
They're not really addicted to the actually overconsumption of the food. It's just the addiction from the brain. So that's why I like, if you're, again, and everybody's different, but if you're morbidly obese and you have no energy, testosterone being lipolytic, being dopaminergic signaling, spiking, all those things, it helps motivate
makes sense.
a person to get on the path to do all the things. And I'm not saying that a person can't do it without them, but and let's be honest, Phil, 5 years ago, we didn't have this anyway, right? So like they had to do it, but nowadays it's just, if you understand, and again, there aren't a lot of doctors that understand this. There's not even a lot of trainers that understand this, or even functional health coaches understand it. But if you do understand how to microdose and use therapeutic hormones, it's going to be a better, call it adjuvant, as long as they're doing all the other things. And
makes sense. More tools.
As you know, the other things are always most important. And I always say this when I talk to people: peptides or testosterone are not magic bullets. You cannot, under any circumstances, do anything with any of those things if you don't have your lifestyle dialed in. And so many people think that they're just cheat codes and that they're easy buttons and, exercise in a pill or a bottle or something like that. And that all you have to do is that. I mean, my chiropractor today was adjusting me, and he was saying some woman came into him, and he's not like us, but, he knows a little bit. And she was like, oh, she was telling me about this retatrutide. And he's like, what can you tell me about that? And I'm like, well, yeah, bro, retatrutide is a three-phase agonist. Yeah. And, it's been around in the research community and really now everybody's community for 3 years, but it's still not approved and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, well, she told me that. And then it was just instant, you could tell the doctor told her, builds muscle. You don't have to lift weights. So this is what people are being told. This is the nonsense, because again, at the end of the day, dude, like the doctors are attempting, as I always say this, they're attempting to make money. Mm-hmm. And if the pharma rep comes into them and says, start them here and go higher, that's how everybody in the pharma command circle makes money. The pharmaceutical giant makes money. The actual pharmaceutical rep makes money. The doctor makes money. The patient is the one, that gets experimented on, because they're the ones that usually have their receptors blown out because the dosage is starting too high and then it goes too high. It's like I always say, in the pharma world, titrate high, go higher. In the research world where you're doing it right, it's start low, go slow, right? So it's like you just have to have what I would call an education or an understanding and an awareness of like how to use these as tools, because that's all they are. That's what testosterone is. That's what peptides are. GLPs, they're just tools. They're not magic buttons, or magic bullets. And I think so many people think they are because they don't get the correct education when they're initiating.
Yeah, I can't argue with anything you said, because I definitely seen the use of this suite of tools from folks who, even if they're not obese, even if it's just like they're really struggling to get to that next part that they want to be at, and they have a deficiency and they're lifting all the time. It's frustrating, man, when you're doing all that stuff, especially, you get older and maybe the testosterone continues to drop more and more. Yeah. And exactly what you're doing is now actually going back, and it sucks. So you've been on testosterone for quite a long time now. Like, I'm just curious about your personal experience there. What did it change for you versus not? But also, were there any, not myths, but like things that are overhyped, I guess, that people think about testosterone?
Yeah. So I've been on therapeutic testosterone since I was 1 month from turning 30. So this goes back to 1999, because I'm 55 today. So I've been on it, 26 years, basically going on 27 years. And I've used every delivery system. When I first started, it was injectable. And then after that, I was like, I have to inject myself. Because back then, dude, we didn't have 31, 32 gauge insulin needles. They had testosterone in like cottonseed oil. You know what I mean? So a lot of people, if you had any kind of like hyperallergic or, a histologic response to it, you'd have an injection response to it. But back then they were probably injecting with like 24, 25 gauge needles. So, it creates scar tissue. But then after that, I was using cream, and I was, putting it on my forearms, putting it on my inner thighs. And then obviously, as time progressed, we found out about transscrotal testosterone. You put it at the base of your scrotum, 200 milligrams per gram, compounded cream. So I've used them all. Outside of that, obviously I've written prolifically about all the different delivery systems. Outside of small needle, insulin syringe injection, whether it's either IM or sub-Q or transcranial, all the other delivery systems are fraught with issues or will not raise a man or even a woman's testosterone into optimal levels. There's guys now out there, promoting this. I forget what it's called. It's an oral, lozenge. There's even the Testo, which is the nasal stuff, which is, by the way, horrific, which causes headaches and sinus infections and sinus cavity issues. My God, it goes on and on. But there's lots of delivery systems for testosterone. Almost all of them are highly inefficient other than, like I said, small insulin gauge syringe injections. And that's, again, IM or sub-Q. You can obviously inject into the belly. I want to talk about that in a second. And then transcranial. And for women, same thing, injection or cream on the interlabial lips or the hood of the clitoris. Because again, that tissue is the same permanent skin permeability that a man's penis has. It's exact same a bit. So, but base of the scrotum or at the hood of the clitoris or interlabial lips is the same. So those are your only two tried and true delivery systems that work for people. I know there's other stuff out there now, and there's even, that oral lozenge is now FDA approved, but everyone that I've spoken to about it, including docs, say, yeah, you can get a man to like 200 to 400, right? So it's like the FDA loves it, right? Because you don't actually optimize them, but you can show movement, on the chart. So great. But then you also find out that it's like $450 a month with insurance, right? Versus a bottle of 200 milligram, 10 cc testosterone, $75, from GoodRx. So you really just have to understand the ins and outs. But to your original question, if you do this right, and what I mean by doing it right is, again, microdosing, starting low, going slow, not expecting it to make you the Incredible Hulk or to, a professional bodybuilder or any of that. Because again, I always like to say, to be that size, you have to take a lot of stuff. Right? Not just testosterone, but, most likely some other stuff, anabolics, growth hormone, insulin, eat a lot of food. There's lots of peptides you can talk about too. But the reality is if you're just using therapeutic testosterone, you start very, very low. You attempt to do as many shots, or if you're using the cream, it's daily administration, but as many to mimic the body's natural production. Right. So I always settled on in my life, and still to this day, 3 shots a week. So it's like every other day. There are lots of people that inject every morning. I know lots of guys and women that do that. They think it's like, part of their morning ritual. They like injecting with a 31 or 32 gauge needle. Like for a woman, it's like 2 milligrams, and for a guy, it can be like 15 to 25 milligrams or something like that. Or some guys probably do 30. To get around 200. But again, everybody's dosing is different. As far as the side effects profile, if I go way back to remember it, because I don't have any sides anymore from any of this. I've been on it for so long. The little things that most people know about, you can get bumps, you can get like little zits, or rashes like on your upper back or your upper shoulders. I think that has a lot to do sometimes with diet, how much insulin, what your insulin sensitivity is. When you're eating a lot more carbs, and you're eating, let's say, less restrained, I've always noticed, and again, this is my opinion, but I've always noticed that you can get more acne. I think people call it back. But again, I wanted to talk to you about like testosterone in the belly. I think one of the things that a lot of people don't understand is if you have a lot of belly fat, so you've got insulin resistance in your belly where your belly fat is, and you inject testosterone into it, which a lot of people do, it causes another inflammatory reaction. Because the visceral fat, senses the testosterone and is like, what the hell is this? It's another chemical you're injecting into it. Not to mention, it's not just testosterone. It could be, again, grapeseed oil or MCT oil or whatever. So a lot of times guys get, what they assume to be estrogen-related side effects, mood imbalance, water retention, irritability because the belly fat and the testosterone don't mix. And none of those are high estrogen symptoms. Those are all literally due to inflammatory response by your body. Yeah. So, I talk about this a lot, but again, a lot of doctors mistake this because so many men who are fat, when I say fat, I mean, literally they're carrying like a spare tire, right? So lots of guys are, big, training in the gym, but they got a belly because they're drinking too much alcohol, eating too much processed food and sugar. So when they inject the testosterone into the belly, they get that inflammatory response. And then that response by their doctor is like, oh, your estrogen is, high. I got to give you an AI or I got to suppress your estrogen. And dude, as you know, you just shook your head. So I do know.
Without even testing it, right?
You never, under any circumstances, suppress a man's estrogen because when you suppress a man's estrogen, that's when the side effects and the symptomology starts. Because as I like to say, man, and this is like really well understood in the medical world, but not in the TRT, in testosterone using world, estradiol is a pleiotropic hormone that's responsible for brain health, bone mineral density, skin health, sexual function, heart health. I mean, I could go on and on and on. So when you suppress estradiol, you are creating all sorts of very bad cellular processes and cellular cascades that you don't want. So, there's thankfully some really good doctors out there that have looked at guys who have been on therapeutic testosterone for decades, let's just say 15 years plus, who've been on AIs, and dude, they have the bone mineral density of birds, like literally birds. Like their skeleton cannot hold, or let's just say they cannot deal with axial stress because, their bone mineral density has been destroyed. So again, I think the most important thing is for anybody that's using therapeutic testosterone, if your doctor is putting you on an AI, immediately seek out another doctor, because there's never a reason to use an AI. And the other thing to mention about that, which is important, is there's no level of estradiol that is too high. And what I mean by that is, in the absence of symptoms and side effects, if you start therapeutic testosterone and your estradiol goes to 120, 150, I've even seen it at people like 180, and you don't have any symptoms or side effects, theoretically, Philip, you are more protected from a vascular or cerebral event than anybody who has like an estradiol walking around of like a 50, 60, or 70. And so many doctors see an estradiol in the 60s, 70s, and 80s and instantly freak out and say, oh my God, we got to lower your estradiol because it's not in that magical, standard mean deviation, which is insane. And again, this is what blows me away. The very truth of the ranges, right? And you've got LabCorp, you've got, what's the other one? Quest Collab. And then there's a couple other ones now. And if you ask the governing bodies, which is the Andrology deal and then the Endocrinology Society, how did you guys come up with these ranges? They literally said, I'm not joking, this is a fact, that, we just took an average man in the 50s and we measured it, and that's what we gave it to. So imagine that doctors are trying to give people, or keep men especially, in that 22 to 40 magic range from the 50s for men who aren't even on therapeutic hormones. It's absolutely insanity. So I always tell people, if you're going to go on therapeutic testosterone, do nothing else and allow your estradiol to fall to its natural level. Because again, we're all biochemically unique, as you know. So your range, it's going to raise or it's going to go to wherever it's going to go, and then it's going to level off. And if you don't have any symptoms or side effects, and again, very few guys do, again, you might have mood alteration when you first start. You might have a little water retention. The fatter you are, the more water retention you're going to have. Because remember, aromatase, the enzyme that cleaves, testosterone into estrogen, is found in fat tissue. So the fatter you are, the more aromatase you're going to have. So that's all very normal. But again, you have a medical community that doesn't really understand this very well. And so all the time, they instantly panic. They either withdraw their testosterone dose or they put them on a higher dose of an AI. And that's the absolute wrong thing to do. And, to your question earlier about levels, that's also getting weird because the best doctors know that they don't even care, right? Like some guy might have 1,500, some guy might have 950. Some guy might have 1,100, 1,200. In the absence of symptoms and side effects, the testosterone level doesn't matter as much. It's just like, one of the doctors who used to mentor me was like, do you feel good? And do you have any symptoms or side effects? If you don't, everything is fine. I will give you a guidance range. I think free testosterone for optimized men has to be somewhere between 40 and 45.
Which unit is that? Because I know there's a couple. That's picoliters per decigram or something.
Picograms per deciliter. And so most guys that I've consulted with, and there's been thousands, when I see a guy who feels great, they're 42 or higher, right? I've walked around for a decade probably at 50, right? And that's just kind of where I'm at. And I don't take that much. I take probably 140 to 160 milligrams a week. And very honest, dude, like with our new stuff, the BioLongevity Labs, the FLGR and the Clotho, Clotho literally improves hormone production. So there's been times since I started Clotho where I've only taken 2 shots a week. And so I'm only getting like 100 milligrams a week and I feel no different. I've tested since I've been on Clotho, done labs twice since I've been on Clotho, and never once have I been below 50 on a free testosterone level. And trust me, there have been many weeks in the last like 9 months where I've only taken 2 shots because I've just been traveling and, you just forget and stuff like that happens. So as I'm getting older, my testosterone dose is going down, but I haven't shown from a clinical lab or, biomarker indication that my levels are going down. But
because the replacement is sufficient, you're saying.
Yeah. Well, or, it's also, I think the clotho is, improving hormone production. I mean, all the science shows that it does that. And so I didn't really figure that out until like the last couple of months because I got my labs done again. And I'm like, you know what? I haven't even been taking 3 shots a week and I'm still, 50 free and like 1150 total. And my doses are a lot lower. So it has to be that. Now, obviously I'm just giving you an opinion, but that's what I think, after talking with some other people, because some other people similar to me have noticed similar things.
Yeah. It's funny. As you were saying that, I was looking up my last check. It was like 2021, 67 free, 600 total, which shows you that the numbers can be very different.
100%. Yeah. And listen, it's very important for men that are watching this to know that your total, it's not a meaningless number like I used to say, but it's not as meaningful because again, total is bound and not accessible, right? And free is bioavailable and available to be used by the body. So if you have a high total level and you have let's just call it a suboptimal SHBG, which is sex hormone binding globulin, then that means that you really don't have a lot of free testosterone accessible. And again, you see this in a lot of skinny fat guys who don't lift weights. They're going to have like a 50 plus or 60 plus SHBG, and they'll be like 525, total. And their doctor won't measure their free, and they'll be like, "Oh, you're great," and they have the worst testosterone deficiency. These are guys that have like a 7 or 8 free testosterone. And you see that all the time. Docs always miss that. They always miss that.
And what about the weekly bound? I've heard of that too, right? In between, does that matter, or just free is good enough to tell you?
Free, I mean, it does, but for all you really have to understand is you're free. And again, if you have a free, and again that picograms per deciliter magic number, and you're below 25, you absolutely have a testosterone deficiency. Now, most doctors won't tell you that because they're going to tell you that like 15 to 25 is normal. But who wants to be normal in today's world?
No, we don't want to be normal, man. Not listening to this show. So I always had this question about the symptom thing, and it keeps coming up. It's one thing if you have obvious symptoms, okay, right? But what if you don't know that you have symptoms? And what I mean by that is we live in a world today, like you said, in the modern world where people are probably walking around far suboptimal, but it's normal to them because that's all they've known. And so how do you know? I
love the question because, dude, so many people literally do walk around in a default state of suffering. Yeah. So the truth is, how you know is the number one symptom of obviously a hormone deficiency in both men and women is brain fog, right? So I think the best way to say it is like, if you feel like you have to take a nap at 1:30 to 3 o'clock every single day, regardless of what you eat. A lot of people will debate me on this and they'll be like, oh, but that's just because they had a big carb lunch or something like that, right? And it's just serotonin release. It's like, no, if you actually feel like you have to take a nap between 1 and 3 or, say 2 and 4, then it's likely that you have, suboptimal dopamine levels. And this is always due to a deficiency in hormones. So that's a number one symptom. And, to your point, a lot of other guys, when you talk about this with them, and I know like this in my own family and people in my inner circle who aren't doing what we're doing and aren't familiar with all this, they'll be like, if you even talk about this with them, they freak out and they're like, bro, everything works down there so good. Like, it's always this like
manhood thing.
Yeah. No way, bro. And it's like, I always want to tell people like, look, man, a therapeutic hormone deficiency hormone deficiency has absolutely zero to do with sex drive and sexual function. That's the last thing normally to go. So if you're going to rank, number 1 is brain fog. Number 2 is a depressive or lethargic attitude. And then number 3 is energy, right? And again, I always say this to anybody nowadays. If you have a belly and you're not hormonally optimized, you can just automatically consider yourself deficient. Because remember, all that visceral fat in the belly and that insulin resistance due to that visceral fat is, as you and I already discussed, is causing a cytokine storm all the time right there. And guess what? It shuts down sexual function. It shuts down gonadic and spermatogenesis. So there's just no way that you have optimal hormones if you have a giant belly. And the same thing for women. And by the way, you spoke about endometriosis. By the way, did you know that there's actually a peptide now that's treating that? Have you heard about that yet?
Wow, maybe. Because, yeah, tell me about it.
Well, I mean, we can get into it in a second. I'm not like an expert on that, but I've been, we're contemplating selling it. But here's what I can tell about this. Most women, and this is sad, by the way, but most women who have hysterectomies, endometriosis, fibroids, bro, it's all visceral fat buildup and insulin resistance from having too much belly fat. Now, remember, women don't normally carry belly fat. They carry it in their hips, their glutes, but they do carry it in the vulval region. You've seen women where they have that big burst, right? Like right below where their shorts are. That's because they've got tons of visceral, hard, resistant body fat in that area. And that's what actually causes all of these tumors, these fibroids, again, the endometriosis. Nobody's talking about this in medicine because they just don't understand the inflammatory pathways in the ways they should. There's some people, but honestly, if you get a woman to lose that hard visceral fat, and it's not easy, it's absolutely not easy. They got a cardio, insulin controlled living, hopefully a GLP, a 2 or 3 stage, and then obviously hormone optimization, and you get them moving. They can get rid of a lot of that fat, but almost all of these people never are told this. And they're literally said, hey, you got to have surgery. We got to remove all this. We got to remove all this tissue. And then they just cut it all out of them. And all of it, dude, I mean, I don't want to say all of it, but most of it is just very hard, visceral body fat that has been in there because, again, they were just, overweight. After their second child, they never lost the weight. They call it the baby fat or whatever. And it just builds up. And that's what's causing all those things down there. So, yeah, it is very interesting. But I'm telling you, if you see a woman like that or you see a man with a belly, if they're not hormonally optimized or working towards it, the likelihood that they are is extremely high.
Yeah, I want to get back to visceral fat because that's a fascinating area to target. Yeah. Endo 205, I think is what it's called. I looked it up. And it's interesting. With endometriosis, that's a whole separate topic. I know there's also a genetic component because there are young women who can have it too. So there's probably different factors. But going back to your comment about belly fat injections, do you then recommend not injecting it there to avoid those symptoms? Or is that just...
I do. That's a great question. So that's a big failure for most physicians. Because remember, at the end of the day, most people are injecting into their belly because they don't feel it. So, the better solution is going to be the upper deltoid, the back of the arm, the upper gluteal fat pad, right? And the buttocks region. And for people that can handle quad injections, those are great. I cannot handle a quad injection. My whole life.
That's how I inject another thing I take. So it's funny you mentioned that.
Dude, you're going to laugh because my entire life, like even peptide injections, like if I inject my quad, I have complete debilitating DOMs for literally 36 hours. Yeah. And it all happens within 6 hours. Now, I have never understood. I've heard from many other guys that say the same thing. I think my legs are so muscular and so vascular and so lean that it just causes some sort of weird, like inflammatory reaction.
Yeah, so I just keep that extra layer of fat. It doesn't body
honestly,
good,
dude, it's crazy. I mean, I was been a basketball player before, and so my legs were always just really, really muscular. I've injected. You're gonna laugh at this. I've injected into skin. I'm pulling it right now. The lax skin, like right around my kneecap. And thinking, that's not muscular, it's nothing. And dude, the same happens to me. Like 6 hours later, I'm like, God, I wish I wouldn't have done that. So I just have this weird effect in my legs, but anywhere else in my body, I don't feel anything lately. Yeah. Right. So, we're all different. Again, we're all.
You got options. It sounds like you have options at least.
Yeah, I know. We totally do. But, that is, to me, I'm glad you asked that. I don't think any person who is, let's say, 20% or higher body fat and specifically storing it in the belly section should be injecting there. You should be injecting in areas that are more intramuscular so that you don't have that inflammatory response. Okay.
Now, you mentioned the symptoms and you said lowest is sexual function. And I think there was if you look at these consensus statements and these position statements and stuff, somewhere I came across, maybe it was in your work, about women and the use of testosterone being linked to this. If you have low sexual desire, like only if you have that, should you take it? Otherwise, don't take it. Have you heard that?
I don't think so. Let me just say this.
It sounds ridiculous, especially after you just said it's
the lowest. I will put it this way. Women respond to hormones much better than men do.
Yeah.
And, again, one of the mentors who taught me a lot about this stuff used to say that giving a woman hormones is like giving a dry plant water. So you just have to give them the correct amount. Right. And again, I always say this to people, like, if you understand biology and sexual differentiation, there's no difference between a man and a woman other than the amount of testosterone that they were exposed in utero. That's it, right? So if you give a woman who's now an XX chromosome and you give her a bunch of testosterone at 30, you'll turn her into a dude. And that's exactly what happens, right? So it's like, let's just be very clear. A woman's clitoris becomes a penis. I mean, I don't understand why people don't understand this. It's very, very simple stuff. But if you give a woman a very low, surgically precise dose of testosterone, they're not going to have any sexual dysfunction. And this is always going in your 30s, 40s, 50s. I mean, my wife is 54 and she takes 4 milligram shots of testosterone a week. Same type that I use, but it's in a 15 milligrams per cc, versus mine is 200 milligrams per cc. And dude, she is just as sexually as efficient as she was in her 20s before she even knew me. Our sex life is amazing. So it's like, there's no reason that women have to suffer, sexually from a performance decline in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, but they just have to be hormonally optimized. And as you know, the WHI destroyed the hormone awareness and just call it understanding of physicians in America about females. And there's just so many women that are not being treated. I mean, dude, I have a huge private
like the breast cancer and all that. Yeah,
dude, I have a huge private membership group now, and most of them are women. There's like 520 women in the group out of like 870 people, so it's more women than men now. And a lot of them came from Mind Pump. And these people, dude, when I hear their stories, it's sickening. Like the doctors won't let them because they missed the window. I mean, I have heard because of the WHI, it blows me away. Yeah. But I've never seen a woman in my entire life who was 50 or older, who started therapy correctly. There's lots that don't start correctly, who has not said it was the greatest thing that ever happened to them. That they got their sexual function back. They were able to get, wet and moist and all the things that women want, come back when you hormonally optimize them, but way too many are not. And by the way, I need to say this too, like a lot of the doctors that do work with women, they don't give them testosterone. Yeah. They give them literally estradiol and progesterone and dry them out. It's like the most insane thing. It's like, especially women that have had their, been castrated, they've had their ovaries removed, right? So they can't produce testosterone now. And now you're just giving them progesterone and estradiol. You're making it worse. They don't even understand basic biological cascades. It's absolutely insane. So many women say, my doc won't give me testosterone. It's like, how is that possible? But they just don't understand. They're afraid. Like you said, cancer, the WHI, there's just so much misinformation.
So let's kind of pivot a little bit here because we talked a little bit about training, lifting, talked a little bit about visceral fat. So I kind of want to attack it from both angles. One angle is, okay, so powerful is muscle, building muscle, the training stimulus itself for building muscle and just carrying around that extra body, lean mass. And then conversely, where does cardio come in here? And I want to target specifically some of the recent research on like certain types of sprinting for like peri and postmenopausal women showing that it can reduce visceral fat. Yeah. So maybe tackle both of those in this context.
Yeah. So first off, I have a new book. The book is called Living Leaner, Longer, Stronger. And it's definitely my seminal work. It was actually written by a ghostwriter, but my team has been involved in it to make sure that it has my edge and everything in it. But it's written for the mainstream, bro. And I've never written a book for the mainstream previously, right? So anybody who ever has read any of my books knows they're very advanced, right? So this book is written for the mainstream to talk about what you just mentioned, which is like building muscle, right? So I can definitely say this statistically provable fact: the leaner you are, the longer you will live. That is undeniable. And a lot of people hear that and they're like, oh, well, what does that mean? And it means like, well, you got to build muscle. You can't be lean if you don't have muscle. And then people will be like, well, that's not true, Jay, because in the blue zones, all these Japanese, they're not muscular. That's not true. Because if you would measure their trunk body fat and their, again, call it composition, you would find out that they were very low body fat. So again, this is very simple stuff, right? The more muscle and the leaner you are, the less inflammation you have. Inflammation is what leads to all of the degradation of cells. Cell degradation leads to inflammation. Inflammation is what causes the diseases of aging. It's very, very simple stuff, but people, overthink it. But building muscle is the number one longevity thing that anybody can do. There's no other biohack, no peptide, no GLP, no FLGR, none of these things. You have to be able to train at an intensity that A, builds muscle, and B, does not overtax your skeletal frame, right? So I think a lot of people, you were talking about earlier, a lot of people, sadly, who do train, don't train productively, right? Go to the gym 4 days a week, 5 days a week. Some are going 6, and they're doing, Instagram or TikTok influencer training protocols. They're overtraining. They're doing too many reps, too many sets. They're never actually, taxing their muscles and going to what I call positive muscle fiber. So without saying that, if you understand how to productively train, and that's obviously to recruit, muscle fibers to fail, at a level that, actually, basically creates stimulus and builds muscle over time, there's nothing better. There's literally nothing better than that, right? So I think that people, if there's a take home, it's like people as they age have to understand the coordination, the neurological, aspect of training. And if you don't, because you're never an athlete, and I realize a lot of people were not, then you have to hire a coach who can teach you this. And bro, you know this.
It's a skill. It's a skill. It's the most important skill you have.
But way too many people watch videos, especially in today's day and age, and then think that they have any clue what they're doing, and they don't. And you and I know this. Like, I'm 1 year away from never going to a gym again. I'm building an amazing gym in my house. Nice. That's the house that I just bought down here in Florida. It's going to cost me a fortune, but it's like my custom thing, and I'm going to just go in there, walk 20 yards from wherever I live, and go into my gym. But like, for decades, I've been going to gyms all around the world, and I watch, and it's sad. It's absolutely insane. And again, as you know, you can't intervene, right?
No. That's bad etiquette. You can't go teach unsolicited.
Yeah, exactly. You never intervene.
I mean, I see personal trainers screwing their clients up all the time. Bad. And I'm like, man, if I could just show you for 5 seconds.
No, 100%. And the axiom, the teacher appears when the student is ready, right? Like they got to be ready, right? So you never intervene, but it's amazing to see people going to gyms. And bro, by the way, it's worse now. Younger people today are doing the most insane things. Like, I mean, it blows my mind how bad it's getting because, again, the proliferation of videos. People are watching fit people with great genetics, younger, who are doing their crazy and still building muscle and thinking, oh, I can do this too. And it's
so you're saying it's not that they're watching videos for form. They're watching videos on programming and exercise selection and everything that's ridiculous too. Yeah, exactly. Right. Because I was going to say, like, when I first learned to lift, and that wasn't too many years ago, I read Starting Strength like 3 times. I watched the videos, and I still had to go to a coach, for 1 hour to fix all the things that I couldn't quite get. Because it really is a skill. You got to,
people like us learned from mentors. We learned from strength coaches or masters. And so many people today literally learn from TikTok and YouTube, bro. And that's not a way to learn. Again, like I said, if you're not an athlete and you have not practiced with skillful mentors or coaches who taught you the format, the training, the actual neurological, biomechanics, you can't just start watching videos and doing it. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because on this show, we talk a lot about the principles, like you mentioned, mechanical tension and the other principles. And you can only do that to a certain extent, right? Because it's abstract, it's theoretical. You've got to get in there. And even when you try to describe it, it's not good enough. So it's a skill you have to put your hands on, just like gardening. You can't become a good gardener. You can't become a good musician, whatever, without doing it.
What is repped is kept. Right.
Is repped is kept. There you go. So, So, all right. So muscle is a whole thing. That's 3 other episodes we can get into on that connection to this. But real quick on the sprinting thing. So on the visceral fat. Yeah, there seems to be, I know Bill Campbell actually reviewed one of the studies recently that looked at women and sprinting, and they compared it to, I think, steady state cardio and also more of a HIIT protocol, something like that. I might be making nonsense up, and found kind of an interesting drop in visceral fat when measured through, I don't know if it's DEXA or MRI or something, from sprinting. Have you heard this?
I have. So here's my take. Yeah. So intensity of cardio is always going to be relevant to fuel source, right? So if a person is, fasting and they're doing high intensity cardio with no muscle glycogen, bad. If they're a keto or carnivore bro and they keep their, their muscle glycogen levels low all the time because they think that, carbs are the devil or the bad guy or whatever, and they're doing, high intensity sprinting or any kind of high intensity, also bad. Because I always tell people, like, we have to train or lift or eat relative to our energetic demand, right? So for us, mostly bodybuilders, gotta have carbs, right? Like I know people debate that there's keto bodybuilders or carnivore bodybuilders and blah, blah, blah. But the reality is like our bodies are designed to handle carbs, fats, and proteins. give them the carbs when the body is preferentially going to refuel from a glycogen standpoint. So I think that all forms of cardio have merit, and I think they're all, especially productive. I think the older a person is, the less likely high intensity ballistic movement is beneficial, because the risk to injury is much greater. And the reason that is, again, is the guy who's 55 who used to do all sorts of HIT in his 30s and his early 40s. You don't really have the synovial fluid in the joint caps when you're in your 50s that you had in your early 40s and your late 30s. So if you're going to do high intensity, which I still think is awesome and productive, you got to do it in the right place. When you're for sure protected, the floor is sand, the floor is rubberized. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I should have clarified, by the way, the study was on bikes.
There you go.
So
it
was sprinting on bikes with like 55
way better. Yeah. And by the way, that's what I do, right?
Yeah,
so I have literally a life cycle over here. And then I also have one of these.
Yeah. You make a good point though, about injury and all that.
Yeah. So, but dude, I see this all the time. It's important. Like a lot of people in their late 40s and 50s, early to mid 50s, like my age now, are still keeping up with the Joneses. They're still doing what they did in their 30s and 40s that they got away with because they could, that they can't now. And what I mean is, sprinting outside, on asphalt, doing stuff like that, going upstairs, at stadiums and stuff like that, and again, these are great movements for anybody who's younger and can handle that kind of wear and tear and that impact on their body. But dude, I'm telling you, running the stairs at 52, it just takes one wee wobble and your back is compressed and you've got a vertebral compression issue, or you have worse, a laminectomy in your future with a disc. So you have to be very cautious. And that's why, like what you just said is perfect. Like, moderate intensity to steady state with HIT mixed in, on something that is not ballistic, a bike, an ergometer, obviously a treadmill with a 40-degree incline is amazing, but you just again, and clearly I'm talking about people in their, 50s and older, right? I think you got to start really thinking at 44, 45 about giving up heavy deadlifting, heavy squatting, axial plate loaded stuff. You can't do that kind of stuff, even if you're strong enough to do it, because again, it just takes one, flicker and you're out of the gym for 6 to 8 months. And that's what you don't want.
My community would be a little mixed on that, Jay, I'll be honest, because there are a lot of guys in their 70s.
They're meatheads.
I know they're meatheads.
I gotta keep lifting heavy. But dude, until you put yourself in the hospital and can't train for 8 to 9 months.
Yeah.
Listen,
it's true. It's true.
And a heavy deadlifter guy. And I stopped at 45. And I met a chiropractor. I can't remember his name now because he was in Southern California. This is going back about 10 or 12 years ago. But he's showing me videos of really strong people and what happened, when they were squatting 3 plates and like what's happening to their lower spine and all that. And look, I know that people want to keep doing this and mentally they feel amazing, but I'm just telling you, just know be cautious, because understand that the wear and tear that you're putting on your spine or the wear and tear that you're putting on your neck or, other places can be very, very destructive over time.
Yeah. And combined with your earlier comment about skill and form and everything, like the more you get into that regime, the more important that is. If you are going to do stuff like that, you just have to be so dialed in and doing it right.
Dude, a 7-year-old person can squat. A 7-year-old person can squat and deadlift. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just the amount that you're doing. Mm-hmm. And I see way too many people attempting to do too much and they're putting their body at risk. And that's all I'm saying. I mean, all those moves are productive and amazing for anatomical alignment and, just again, axial loading and all that stuff. But like, there's definitely a risk, especially with what you just said, especially if your form's not good.
Yep. All right. Let's wrap it up with a very tiny topic called GLP-1s, which you touched on a little bit here and there with the microdosing.
Sure.
And, you've got the single, the dual, and the triple agonists now, the semaglutide and the tirzepatide. And now it depends on how you want to pronounce it, retatrutide or retatrutide. It goes both ways. And the question is like, who should be even taking them? You mentioned morbidly obese or obese people using it as a tool. That makes total sense, right?
Yeah.
We had Jamie Selzer on here who was also a mind pump like you were. And he was like, I think the only guest they've ever had on the show. And he went from like 700 pounds to 300 pounds on GLP-1 while lifting and walking and doing all the right things. So just like, what's your philosophy on it in general? We don't bash any of that here. These are all great tools. Mm-hmm. And then where do you think things are going with all of this?
Yeah, so it's definitely a great question and a great subject. The tools are amazing, but they're literally in 2 years, Philip, they'll be useless or they'll be forgotten because that's how great
they'll be overtaken. You're saying, yeah.
There's stuff in the pipeline right now. And by the way, this is in my chapter. I think it's chapter 7 of the book that I released in February of this year called Metabolic Awakening with GLP Peptides. But the truth is that we have a chapter in that book that's called The Pipeline. And dude, the stuff that's coming. Like you really can't comprehend it. I mean, I tell people this all the time, like in 2 years, there will be stage 5 molecules that will do everything. Like it will increase brown fat. I mean, look, dude, we already have a tool right now from BLL, FLGR242, that absolutely builds mass, floods your system with myokines, inhibits myostatin. And in the same process, it's also lipolytic, right? So it's burning fat. So if you're a man and you take 5 milligrams to 10 milligrams a week and you train and you eat right, you're going to put on somewhere between 6 and 8 skeletal pounds of mass. And I don't give a shit who you are, genetic, natty, on TRT, doesn't matter. Women can even do better because as you realize, women have less myostatin inhibition naturally, right? So you give them a little of this and you push them over the edge. So imagine that tool, embedded in a 4 or 5 stage agonist, GLP, which like I said, will activate brown fat. So you're going to have tools that will make genetic mutants, in the bodybuilding world.
So you can sit on the couch and just become a bodybuilder.
Well, no,
I know, I'm joking, but
you still have to train.
Yeah.
But let's just put it this way. There will not be, nobody will have to suffer like they do now in bodybuilding competitions, to diet, to hardcore, do all that stuff they do at the end. So like if you're a genetic mutant and you understand how, and again, not you, but your coach, understands how to manipulate these tools and utilize these tools to get you to go from, let's say you're 290 on stage and when you start your shred, you're 320. And I mean, before that was grueling work and it's not anymore. And I can honestly tell you that it will not be any work in 2 years. Like literally, if you're a genetic mutant, you will do these things. Yeah, you'll still train and be, as hard as you can, but you won't be, dieting down and sacrificing and, eating nothing but tilapia and broccoli. You know what I mean? So
you can focus more on the lifting side.
Yeah. I mean, the truth is that, obesity should be eradicated. Yeah. And what I mean by that is only, and I don't think it will, but it should be, right? Because the tools are there. I mean, listen, retatrutide can eradicate obesity right now, but they won't make them affordable. So it's up to, educators like us, other physicians and clinical, educators to teach people that they're tools and that they need to be used appropriately. And obviously microdosing them with all the things, again, all the things that we are all talking about here with training and cardio and, eating correctly and getting enough sleep and mitigating EMF. All those things are most important always. They're the biggest tools and the biggest levers. But the rest of these newer things, when used correctly, especially as they get better, are going to be the ultimate, game changer. I mean, they really will be cheat codes, dude. 100%.
Man, we'll see where it all goes. And so I guess for those listening, there's a lot of tools out there. We want to send them your way and say hello and check out your stuff. We'll definitely point to some of their books, but where's like the main place we should send people?
For sure, man. So for free information, jcampbell.com. There's so much. I think we're now in the top 4 sites in the world for, information related to peptides, bioregulators, small molecules, and it's all free, of course. If they want to buy any of the amazing products that we talked about today, we don't sell any GLPs because we don't play that game on BioLongevity, but we have FLGR, we have Clotho. We do have a product that's a small molecule that's similar to GLPs coming. It's called Lepto3GR, and it will be what we call a super retatrutide, but it doesn't compete in the GLP specific peptide pathway or patent chain. But it will be a small molecule that will help people actually burn fat, build muscle, obviously combined with all the other things that we talked about today, or the other tools like therapeutic testosterone, et cetera. So that would be at BioLongevityLabs.com. If you want me to make you an affiliate, I'm happy to do that. We'll create an affiliate code for you. They'll give them 15% off. We're always running sales. The peptide world is very commoditized right now. So, if you have a great product, you got to obviously incentivize people to purchase. And then we have a landing page for podcasts. It's jcampbell.com/free-info. And at that place, you can get every single book I've ever written as a downloadable PDF for free. And eventually Living Leader, Longer, Stronger will be there too.
That's awesome. All right. So we'll put all those in the show notes. I'm not going to repeat them all here, and get folks a discount to BioLongevity Labs. Man, it's been a pleasure. I mean, we just barely scratched the surface. I know we did. So folks, check out Jay and just Google him. You'll find him. He's been on Mind Pump and so many other shows. Thanks for coming on, Jay. It's been a pleasure.
Well, I appreciate you having me, and I'm really grateful for this call. It was awesome.
Awesome. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. Please consult your healthcare provider before making any health changes. Some links mentioned may be affiliate links, which means I may earn a commission at no extra cost to you if you choose to purchase.